I know that one of the things that keeps coming up during the Zoom calls that we've been doing is that parents are a little bit unsure about phonics. So I thought it would be a good idea to make a video to kind of explain to you how we teach phonics at nursery and how we eventually get children to a position where they're ready to read. So at Little Angels, we mostly follow a phonics program called Letters and Sounds, which sets out for us the order in which things should be taught in order to create confident and effective readers. But I think the thing that I really like about working at Little Angels is that we're not sort of strictly tied to any one phonics program. We loosely follow Letters and Sounds, but we use elements of lots of different programs. So there's a program called Jolly Phonics that we often use the songs from because we find those are quite catchy and the children really enjoy them. There's a program called Read Write Ink, and they produce some really good resources that we use, flashcards and posters and things. And then I know that we also use a range of online resources so the children can access interactive games and things like that. So although Letters and Sounds is our sort of overarching approach, we do draw on lots of different phonics programs in our teaching. So now I'm going to explain a little bit more about the structure of the Letters and Sounds phonics program. It's split into 6 phases, and at nursery we're mostly looking at the early phases, certainly phase 1 and 2, often phase 3 as well. And once your child goes to school, they'll probably do some repeating of phases 1 and 2 and 3, and then they'll move on to the subsequent phases, probably ending their phonics teaching in around year 2. So phase 1 of Letters and Sounds is covered, I mean, really right from yellow room, I mean, you could even argue blue room at nursery, and it's all about encouraging children to listen to sounds, interact with sounds around them, learn to distinguish between sounds. So what we're really looking at in phase 1 is developing a child's speaking and listening skills, because before a child can read, and even before they can understand about letters and the sounds they make, they need to be really good at listening to and distinguishing between sounds. We teach phase 1 in 7 aspects, they're called. So things like rhythm, rhyme, alliteration, listening to voice sounds, they're all covered in the first phase, and we dip in and out of them. We don't teach them sort of very rigidly. They're involved in all the different activities that we do every day at nursery. During circle time, we might ask the children to clap out their names, so they might say Harriet. We might ask the children to go on a sound hunt around the environment and listen and hear which sounds they can identify. We play phonics games like Silly Soup, which I'm going to make a video of later, which is a game where we put lots of rhyming words into a pot and we pretend to mix them up, and that's to help children understand the differences between the sounds they're hearing. The final aspect of phase 1, aspect 7, starts to look at blending and segmenting, and these are really important skills for reading. In phase 1, it's all done orally, so there's no need for children to learn letter sounds yet. But we'll do activities like we'll say sounds. So we'll say, "Oh, can you pass me the toy cat?" And then we ask the children to listen to those sounds and squash them together. To sort of see which word those are forming. They don't need to know what a C or an A or a T looks like at this point. It's all about listening to the sounds and learning to blend them together. So that's part of aspect 7. The other thing that we do in aspect 7 is segmenting. So that's asking a child to listen to a word and figure out which sounds are being put together to make that word. Now that's a trickier skill. We focus a lot on initial sounds, so the first sound in the word. So that's in games like I Spy, I spy something beginning with K, something beginning with D, and we ask them to have a go at thinking about what sound a word begins with. And this is something that really comes on with practice. At first, it's a really alien concept to children, but as they listen and play the games more, it starts to become second nature, and that's really important for reading. Another way of explaining segmenting to children is to imagine it sort of like a robot talking. So we could say things like, "Oh, can you pass me the p, I, g, and that's a way of helping them understand chopping up a word into its the sounds that make it. So once we've finished with phase 1, we move on to phase 2. And in phase 2, we do start to explore the sounds made by letters. Now, you might have seen or noticed that we teach the sounds in a slightly funny order. We don't teach sounds in alphabetical order. There is a defined order in which we teach sounds, and it's done by the sort of frequency with which they occur in our language. Not exactly, but sort of almost. So we start off by learning the 19 most common letter sounds. And the reason that we do this is because for children to enjoy reading and to enjoy phonics, it's really important that they feel successful as quickly as possible. So if they learn the common sounds first, then they're able to build words really quickly, read words really quickly, and feel a kind of instant success, which then helps them to feel good about phonics and feel good about reading. And have that momentum to continue. So that's why we teach the sounds in a slightly funny order. So when we're introducing the sound, we introduce them one at a time, and the order does vary from phonics program to phonics program, although you'll find it's very similar. So in letters and sounds, we start with the sounds with the sounds s, a, and t, which are made by the letters S, A, and T. When we're teaching sounds, we talk about letters, so S, but then we talk about the sound that it makes, which is S, because later on in phonics you'll find that some letters can make more than one sound. So this is kind of, we start early on using that kind of language, talking about the letter and the sound that it makes. So these are the 19 most common sounds that we learn in phase 2. I'll just go over them now because I know the other thing that some parents are sometimes unsure about is how to pronounce the sounds. I know that when I was at school, I was taught, for example, that this is M, but you'll see that actually as teaching's moved on, we've realised that we've slightly modified the way that we say these letter sounds to make it easier when a child moves on to the blending phase of reading. So I know that for me this used to be S, but now we say S. So we try to lose the kind of sound at the end of the sounds, because as you can imagine, when you're trying to squash a word together, to blend it together, the bit sometimes gets in the way. So if you say s at, then you're reading s at, whereas if you lose the then you've got s at, sat. And you can see how that flows more naturally for a child. So where possible, try to lose the I think it's called a schwa, the sound at the end of that you kind of are inclined to make at the end of each sound. So s, a, t, p, I, n, d, g, o, k, k, e, a, r, h, b, f, l. So those are the first 19 sounds that we learn. And wherever possible, try to encourage your child to look at your mouth as you're making the sound, because particularly with ones like n and you can see how if you didn't watch somebody, those two sounds are very similar. But when you watch, you can see the difference in the way my mouth moves. N is more my teeth and tongue, whereas is very much my lips. So try to encourage your child to watch you, or have a mirror while you're practicing phonics, so that you can make sure that you're making the same sounds. So alongside these sounds, we also learn a few digraphs, and digraphs are where two letters are acting together to make a single sound. So I'll show you the digraphs that we learn now. So these are the digraphs that are taught in phase 2. We have k, f, l, and s. They make the same sounds as some of the phonemes that we learned at the beginning of phase 2. But as you can see, they're two letters acting together to make those sounds. So these sounds are mostly found at the end of words. So things like duck, stuff, pull, fuss. And they use letters that are familiar to the children already. And they just help children when they encounter them, not to just repeat the sound. So sometimes you might be trying to read the word duck and a child might read d-a-k, and obviously that's quite confusing, but if you can remind them that this is a digraph and the two are acting together to make one sound, so d-a-k, we just need to say it once. So those are the digraphs that we learn in phase 2. So alongside phase 2, we'll start to encourage the children to recognise familiar words in their environment. Obviously, one word that's most familiar to the children is their name, and this is something that we really encourage early on. So when your child moves to green room, as they come in the morning, there's a self-registration tree and they have to look for their picture, and on the back of the picture is a name. So as the children get older, the aim is that we would turn the piece over so that they had to look for their name rather than their picture. On the wall in the quiet room, we have all of the children's names, and we encourage them frequently to go and find their name, and they like to attempt to copy the sounds that they see in their name. It's really important when you're showing your child their name that it's taught with a capital first letter and then the subsequent letters in lowercase. I know that sometimes it's sort of seen as easier, and some of us were taught when we were younger to recognise our name with capital letters, and I know it's often the temptation, because those letters might seem easier for children to form, to teach them to write their name in capitals. But if at all possible, it's really good to avoid this, because once a child's learnt to write their name a certain way, it can be really hard to unteach it. So although it might take a little bit longer, in the long run it's worth teaching them to write it and to recognise it the correct way. So once the children start to have a growing repertoire of sounds that they recognise and their blending skills are improving, then it gets really exciting, because they start to be able to read words. And as soon as children feel confident and are showing an interest in reading words, then we encourage them to look at print in all kinds of contexts. As much as possible, we try to illustrate what we're talking about by writing words. We point out words we can see in the environment. We might ask them to guess what a word might say based on its initial sound. So if we're talking about farm animals and we can see there's a name of an animal that starts with a k, then we might ask them, well, which animal could that be? Which animal starts with k? And the more that children see that there's a use for the phonics that they're learning, we find the more it gains momentum and the more they become interested in it. It's also worth saying that while for some children phonics is a really exciting thing that they really want to get good at, they really want to learn to read, there are some children for whom it's just not that interesting. They might be more interested in numbers, they might enjoy art and mark making and crafts, they might be more physical, and that's absolutely fine. All areas of the earliest curriculum are equally important. There's no rush for children to learn to read. The most important thing is that we don't push them into something that they're not enjoying, because that's a surefire way of creating a reluctant reader. So we always try to present our teaching in fun and exciting ways. We try and avoid flashcards as much as possible, although they do have a place. But in any given session that we do, flashcards will only make up a very, very small percentage of our teaching. We prefer to present phonics as a series of sort of games and activities to sort of disguise the learning a little bit more and to help create a kind of excitement around reading. In the year before they start school, sometimes the children in the quiet room enjoy taking reading books home to share with their families. This can be quite a nice opportunity for them to show you what they've been learning, and they're often quite excited to have sort of homework to do at home. Obviously there's no pressure to look at these at all. If you don't want to, you can do as much or as little as you want, but this is something that happens at the end of their time at nursery. So next we move on to phase 3, and in phase 3 we learn the last single letter sounds that we haven't yet covered in phase 2. They're the slightly more obscure sounds that aren't encountered quite as often. So the single letter phonemes that we have are j, v, w, x, y, and z. And we also look at qu. Now when we're teaching qu, we tend to show the q and the u together, because there are very few words where the q and the u don't occur together. It's easier just to teach this as a digraph, so we teach this qu. In phase 3 we also look at a number of consonant digraphs. So we have z, ch, sh, and ng. It's really important, again, to remember with these to encourage your child to look at your face as you're speaking, because ch and sh and th are all quite similar sounds, and it's all about how you move your mouth. That really helps to distinguish. Depending on the program that your child follows once they start school, there might be additional sounds that they learn. So I know that Read Writing, which is another program which is widely used in schools, also includes the sound nk, which is an N and a K together, so like at the end of think or sink. So it sort of varies. And finally, in phase 3, there are a number of vowel digraphs that children learn. So these do vary depending on the program that your child uses, although eventually they will cover all of the digraphs, just perhaps in a different order. So this is A, E, I, O, U, R, or, ow, oi, ear, your, and okay. So yeah, like I said, these might not be taught in this exact order. They might be taught alternatives to these first when they start school, but they will eventually cover all of these. So by the end of your child's time with us at nursery, we aim to have finished phase 2 with them, and we do cover most of the sounds from phase 3. Usually children really start to enjoy phonics by this point. They've felt some success. They might enjoy, pointing out words that they recognise. We continue to play games every day that involve reading. They might be enjoying reading scheme books, and hopefully their phonics is really picking up some momentum. I thought it might be useful for you if I explain what their next steps will be and what happens in the remaining phases of the letters and sounds scheme. So phase 4, the children don't learn any new sounds in phase 4. Phase 4 is all about just consolidating their knowledge, really picking up confidence, getting quicker at blending. In phase 5, the children start to learn alternatives to the digraphs that they've learned. So I'll give you some examples. So if they've learned this as O, as in the word boat, they might start to see this as O, like in the word bow. Where they've learned this as an A sound, like in the word sail, they might start to learn this as an A sound, like in the word play. So this is where it starts to get quite tricky. Certainly up until the end of reception, all that's expected of children is that they would spell words in a phonetically plausible way. So just using any of the sounds that they've learned. If they spelt play, for example, P-L-A-I, that would be okay because that's a sound that they've learned. Once they reach phase 5, they start to look at the alternatives and they start to learn how to make choices about which sound they should use. So, for example, they might learn that this A sound is usually used at the end of the word, like in say, whereas this A sound is much more likely to be seen in the middle of a word. But again, even at this point, they'll still make the wrong choice quite frequently. And finally, phase 6 of letters and sounds is all about really starting to help children gain accuracy and speed in their reading and in their spelling. This phase usually occurs around year 2, so that's 3 years into their formal schooling. And that's where we really start to expect children to make the correct choices about spellings more frequently. Obviously, many mistakes are still made, and that's okay. So you might have noticed when looking at words with your child that some words just aren't phonetically plausible. It doesn't matter how many alternatives you learn, you'll never be able to blend together some words. And we call these tricky words, or sometimes they're called common exception words. And these are taught alongside the sounds during phonics teaching. And they're words that children just have to learn to recognise by sight. So I'll show you the words now that we look at in phase 2 and phase 3. So in phase 2, we look at the words the, to, no, go, and I. Those are words that pop up a lot in books, in different places. And if a child can master all of the sounds in phase 2, in addition to these 5 tricky words, then they can write a lot of sentences. They can convey most things that they want to. Obviously, if they're trying to write and they don't know the spelling for a word, they can still just use their sounds to have a go. Most of these words you could attempt using the sounds that you knew, but it is good for them to start to learn to recognise them. In phase 3, the list gets a little bit longer, and we definitely wouldn't worry if the children at nursery didn't recognise any of these words, but some might start to notice them. So we've got he, she, we, me, be, was, you, they, all, are, my, and her. And you can kind of see why these words don't follow the rules that we've been taught so far. And the other message that I just really want to convey is that you shouldn't feel worried or stressed about any of this at all, because there'll be plenty of children who haven't had any kind of preschool education who'll start in reception with no awareness at all of phonics. We know that the children who leave Little Angels absolutely love books and love reading. They do lots at home, they do lots at nursery. That will really stand them in good stead, whatever happens. And there's absolutely no pressure for children to know any of these things before they start reception. If they do, it's a bonus and it's great, and it can give them that sort of extra confidence. But when they start in reception, you'll find that they'll start again in phase 2 with some phase 1 activities thrown in, and they'll work all the way through the sounds again, which we find is a really good confidence booster for children. But it also means that they've got so many opportunities to consolidate their learning, to build on their knowledge, and to learn to read. So I hope that's been a bit useful. If you've got any questions, feel free to pop them in the comments underneath, and I'll try my best to answer. I think you can sort of see how a combination of learning the sounds and learning the common exception or the tricky words together helps to teach children to read. But I hope you can also see that there's a lot of groundwork that needs doing before a child is even ready to look at letters or to pick up a book. And I think the most important thing that I think we all know is just to keep reading with our children, because the more that they learn to love books, the more they're excited by books, the more they'll have an urge to want to read them themselves. And really it is all about motivation with children. So I hope that that's been a little bit useful.